The other thing I put up on the website, last year's lab test, if anybody noticed that. You can go and have a read of it. That was the first lab test that we did last year. So your lab test next Tuesday will be similar to that.
That's what I did.
Yeah. So there's one or two small things in that lab test that we haven't done yet. In particular, we haven't done parameterized constructors. So I'll go through that on Monday. We might just do that entire problem on Monday as preparation for Tuesday's lab test, okay? But you should take the time to go and study it and study the solution as well. Okay, so why don't we make a Git project, and let's start out and go up onto GitHub and let's make a project, and let's put a processing sketch up onto GitHub, right? So I'm up on github.com first of all, and I'm going to create a new repository to hold this sketch. So the repository name, let's call this test OOP. I'll call it OOP tutorial. Alrighty, so just for some revision, can anyone tell me what happens with the text that you put in the description fields there? What happens with the text that I put into the description field here when I'm creating a project on GitHub?
Does it go into the README?
Yes, it goes into the README file. And what type is the README file?
MD.
It's an MD file. It's a format called Markdown. Alright, so let's just put this is a test repo. Okay, public and private. We'll make this public for now. Initialize the repository with the README. Let's check that. The git ignore file. What's the purpose of the git ignore file?
Delete files out of your repository.
Yeah, give me examples of certain types of files that we wouldn't want in our repositories.
Properties of your processing sketch.
You can leave out the properties, but you know, it's no big deal to put that in because that's only a text file.
Images,
Dirty
issues.
Probably want to put those into the repository. We want to keep everything in the repository that's required to build the project, but not any of the outputs of the build. So last year, I'm sure you did C programs where you started with a .c file, you run it through the compiler. What comes out of the compiler?
exe.
Yeah, what's the intermediate stage? Did you do that? The OBJ file? Okay, so anyway, what comes out of a C program is an OBJ file. The OBJ files get linked together to make an exe file. Stuff like the OBJ files and the exe files, that's what doesn't go into your Git repository. So let's choose a Git. If you did a C one there, it would have stuff like, you know, exe files and OBJ files. They're files that you don't want to include in your Git repository. So let's add an MIT license, which is a permissive license, and let's create the repository. So there's my Git repository, and I've got these three files created: the git ignore file, the license file, and the readme.md file. So let's now come up here, and I'm going to press Control-C in my browser window here to copy the URL for this repository. Why do I want to copy the URL for the repository? In my Git project, I need to set what for the project? The remote. Okay, so this is the remote for the repository. This is I have a local repository on my computer, and this URL is going to tell my local repository to link it up to this remote repository. So there's that one there. Now let's create a new processing sketch and save it somewhere. So here's my processing sketch. I'm just going to save this now into a folder on my hard disk, and I'm going to copy it into my courses, processing work in progress. And what about the name for this sketch? Is there any connection between the name for this sketch and the name I made on the Git repository, or do I need to make a connection between them?
Better than.
Is it relevant? Okay, so it's not strictly speaking necessary, but for now I recommend that you make this the same name as your processing, that you make the processing sketch the same name as your Git repository. Why is that? Because processing expects the processing sketch to be in a folder which is the same name as the processing sketch. So it's better if you keep everything the same name. So I'm going to switch to processing 3 next week as well. I've been using it a bit, and it seems to be much more stable now. So here's what I'm saving my processing sketch as. I'm saving it as OOP tutorial, because OOP tutorial is what I made my Git repository. So I'm going to click save, and there we go. So there's my sketch, and I have created a folder on my hard disk, and now it's time to fire up the bash shell and type our git commands. So I'm going to find the documents, courses, processing work in progress. And here's the folder that I just created, OOP tutorial. So I right click on this folder and I choose git bash here. And git bash here fires up the bash shell and it CDs to the correct folder so that when I type pwd here, I find that I'm in the folder OOP tutorial that I just created. Is that okay with everybody? So now we're going to start typing some git commands. What's the first git command that we type? Git init. Okay. So what does git init do? Yeah, creates an empty git repository in that folder. If I was to look in that folder, would I discover any new files or folders? Yes, there's one new folder and it's called .git. And will I be able to see it?
Yeah.
You will be able to see it, but only if you have enabled viewing of hidden files. Because if you don't have hidden files enabled, it's a hidden file. If you don't have hidden files enabled, if you go over to view here and see hidden items, if that's unchecked, you won't see that folder. So you need to make sure that that's checked so you can see the .git folder. Okay, everybody? Because it's what's called a hidden file.
How did you open the Git from? So it's in
Yeah. If you install Git for Windows, right?
Yeah.
You should be able to right click on that and you see that there's a link on your thing called Git bash here. It's one of the options when you're installing Git is do you want to install the shell extensions, and you usually have that checked. And if you have that checked, then you get options like Git bash here.
Does this work on Windows 7?
Yeah.
There's two separate ones. There's like GitHub, which won't download the thing that allows you to git bash. There's some like other ones.
Yeah, it installs the GitHub client. So if you remember on Monday I talked about what's the best Git client to install. The best Git client to install is Git for Windows as opposed to the GitHub client. If you go up onto GitHub, you can download a big GitHub GUI program which will allow you to do a lot of this stuff. But I recommend, and if you look at, if you look up on YouTube for Git tutorials, it's pretty much the standard approach is the best thing to do is to learn how to use Git from the bash shell as opposed to using the GitHub client, okay? Well, we're computer scientists. We should be familiar with writing commands into the bash shell, right? So you want the Git for Windows client as opposed to GitHub client, okay? So git init. Next thing that we type.
Git remote.
Yep, git remote. What comes next?
Origin.
Yeah, before that, add origin. And then we paste in the URL. How do you paste on the Windows bash shell? Shift and insert. On some laptops you might have to press shift and function and insert. On this laptop it's shift, function and insert. Press enter. So what has that done?
It's linked with,
Yeah.
with the repository online.
Yeah, so this is linked to the local Git repository with the remote Git repository, and it's set up the alias for origin. So now whenever I type origin as part of a Git command, and some of the Git commands allow you to specify which remote server to use, it will use that URL. So origin now means that URL. Okay? So git remote add. Next thing. Next step. Somebody else other than the people on the front row, maybe some of you guys over there, what would you think the next thing we type is? Git init, git remote add. Do you remember we did all of this on Monday?
Git pull.
Git pull. Yeah, let's try that. What will git pull do?
It takes all the files from the repository.
Yeah. So it takes all the files from the remote Git repository and pulls them into the local Git repository. Why would I do a git pull first before I do a git push?
To get the files that were created when you created the Git repository.
Okay, so very carefully. By the way, I notice people are not taking notes or doing anything. You should take notes and write these down into your text file or your notebook or wherever where you're loaded, where you're writing down all of the important Git commands. Okay. So yeah, as Ben says, the reason why we do git pull first is because I want to pull the git ignore file. So when I go and add files to the repository, if they're files which shouldn't be in the repository, then the git ignore file will list those. So, okay, so the first time I ran git pull, I got this error here saying it's not working. How do I fix that?
It says right there.
Tells you right there. Yeah, minus minus. The very first time you run git pull, you have to do minus minus set dash upstream dash 2 git branch. No, hang on, that's wrong. Git pull remote. We can do that. We can do the git branch thing. Git pull. How did we do this on Monday? Did I just type git pull origin master? Git pull. What's that? Git pull origin master will definitely work, but I wonder, do you need to set up the branch information, or does that just work? Okay, let me try git pull again. And if git pull still gives me the same error, yeah, okay, so you have to do this stuff. Oh, such a pain. Why have you to do this? Git branch minus minus set dash up 2 equals origin slash master. Okay, so now that's just telling me that the master branch here maps onto the master branch on the remote repository, or on the upstream. So now when I type git pull, hopefully I shouldn't have to do git pull origin master. Okay, perfect. There we go. So there's git pull. Next thing we type.
Git status.
Git status will tell me what files have been added. Alright, so it says now you've got this file called ooptutorial.pde and sketch.properties, which are untracked. So how do I add those to the repository now? Okay, we need to do a few steps here, don't we? Git add dot is the first one, and you can optionally put minus minus all. If you do git add dot by itself, what's the significance of that? Yeah, only added and modified files will get added. If you deleted files, then they remain as part of that particular commit. So it won't delete files from the commit unless you do minus minus all. So git add dot. Next step. Git commit. Pass in a message, anything at all. There's initial version, and then finally to send these changes to the server.
Git push.
Git push. There we go. So that has sent all of my local changes to the server. Was that the same steps that we did on Monday, or did we do that git branch set upstream thing on Monday?
No, we did just like
What was the difference then? Because I don't remember doing that last step on Monday.
just git pull origin master.
Git pull origin master just worked fine. Yeah, so if you get those kind of, sometimes Git doesn't create the mappings between branches on your local repository and branches on the remote repository. So that's what that statement is doing there. That git branch minus minus set upstream 2 equals origin master. I don't remember us doing this step on Monday, did we?
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Back up out of that.
What's that?
Back up
Oh yeah, escape colon Q and then exclamation mark.
colon Q exclamation.
Yeah, what's happened there is you've actually launched
Aye,
the VI. Yeah, so you just want to quit out of that. Yeah, something that occasionally can happen, right, is, well, let's not worry about it. Right, we didn't do this step on Monday then. We just did git pull origin master. Okay, and that seemed to work okay. Never mind, Git is telling us to run this command, so we'll run this command. And then we've done our commit and committed our changes to the server. So let's verify that everything's set up on the server. When I reload my Git project now, there's ooptutorial.pde and there's my readme.md file. Alright, what I was thinking we'll do is we'll maybe do the first step of the lab test, right? So here is D2228 OOP, and let's find the link to that lab test, and we'll do part A of the lab test this morning. Okay, so here is the lab test 1. Let's view raw. Maybe I need to download it. Okay, so the first thing, yeah, here we go. Here is it's telling you need to load the data set of politicians' expenses, right? So let's do that first of all. So here is the, let's find the link to the text file. Control click should bring us to that link. So there's the text file with the politicians' expenses. This text file is interesting. It's slightly different format to the CSV files that we've been looking at. in that this is actually separated with a tab character rather than a comma character. But apart from that, it's the same, right? The comma seems to be just used here. It's not a delimiter, but it's actually one entire field. And then we've got a tab character which separates this, and the tab character which separates each of these other fields. So it's not separated with a comma, it's separated with the tab. So I'm going to right click on that, choose Save As, and I'll save that into the repository that we just made. Documents, courses, processing micro progress, data, where's the one I just made? There we go, OOP tutorial. And so this should be in the data folder. There we go. Alright, so that's that file saved into that folder. So let's look at what the lab asks us to do. So the first thing, the first question on the lab is create a class called expenses with appropriate fields, default and parameterized constructors. You can use floats for the currency values. Right. So what we kind of did towards the end of on Monday's class was we talked about this concept of encapsulation. Encapsulation means you look at the problem you're trying to solve and you see, how do I make a class to group all of that information together? So looking at this text file, the text file is divided up into name, the party that the person was from, the constituency, the amount returned, which is basically they got their expenses and they returned this amount of their expenses, and this is the amount claimed. So the total amount they got would be equals to amount claimed minus amount returned. And that's the way the file is divided up. So I'm looking at that one thinking, right, a kind of an OO programmer would look at that and say, let's make a class to encapsulate one row from that file. So our class is going to have a name field, a party field, a constituency field, amount returned, amount claimed, and a total field. So let's make a class in processing to encapsulate that data. So here we go. So if you remember, in processing to create a new class, we create a new tab. Make the new tab equals to, the name of the new tab should be EXPENSE. So this is an expense. And each time we construct an object from this, it will encapsulate one row from the file. Okay, so we need to make fields. So we have name, party, constituency, wasn't that the next one? S-T-I-N. Somebody please help me spell constituency.
C-O-N-S-T-I-T-U-N-C-Y.
Stit-U-C-Y. Constituency, yeah. Then we have a few floats.
Amount returned.
Amount claimed.
Let's just call it returned. Save us some typing. We'll make three fields. Returned,
Claimed. Total.
claimed, and total.
And you want to color one as well.
What's that? Okay, we want to color one as well. Yeah, good point. Okay, so that's my expense class. That's the fields in my expense class. That means every expense will have that information in it. Next thing we want to make is what's called a default constructor. So default constructor is going to look like that. In other words, it will be a constructor, a method that, in fact, let's talk about the characteristics of this method. Characteristic number one is that it's the same name as the class. Characteristic number two, the return type, does it have one or need one? No, because a constructor doesn't have a return type. So if you put void expense claimed, then that makes it an ordinary method as opposed to a constructor. Constructor is a special type of method that gets called when the object gets created. And you can then set default values in here. So, something we might want to do is maybe set the name is equals to the empty string, like that. And then the party is equals to the empty string. And the constituency the empty string. And returned is equals to 0.0f. Claimed equals to 0.0f. And then the total equals 0.0f. Okay, so that's pretty much my default constructor. we might want to make what's called a parameterized constructor. Let's see what it actually asks us to do in the lab. Here's a nice thing to do. Appropriate fields, default and parameterized constructors. You can use floats for currency values, total for float. Okay, that's fine. Also add a different type of color. Let's not worry about the parameterized constructor. We'll add it when, and there's party expense. Alright, so that's just another class very similarly. Right, let's move on to this bit here. This is more interesting. Write a method called load expenses. This will populate the two array lists from the file of data. Now the interesting challenge here that tripped a lot of people up, right? I'm just going to have one array list of the parties, another array list of party expenses, but my file is divided up into elements by politician. So I'm going to have lots of entries in that file for each party, and I need to take everything where it says FG, for example, and sum all of that information up into all of the expenses for the Fine Gael party. Nevertheless, let's do the easy bit first, which is to just load each row from the file into an element in an array list. So jump over to this program again. Here's my expense class. Let's put in void like that. Okay, let's make the array list. So array list is now going to be of an object type. It will be the type expense. Okay, so what we have here is an array list where every element in the array list is an instance of a class. Alright, this is a very, very standard way to use array lists, right, with classes. So let's go setup, 500, oops.
You mean size?
Oh, sorry, size, yes, of course, thank you. Alrighty, so now, next thing we want to do is write a method called load expenses. And what this has got to do is it's got to go to that file, and every row from that file has to become a record. Yeah?
Why didn't you declare the array list as a global variable?
It is global variable.
Well, why didn't I, or why did I?
No, why didn't you?
It is a global variable, yeah.
I can't
And I'm probably going to... What's that?
I can't see the
Oh, it's chopped off at the left.
Oh.
Okay. Sorry, yeah.
Cascade the window and move it to the right.
Yeah. Can you see that? That's a bit better, isn't it? Okay. Oh yeah, good idea. Perfect. Problem solved. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, here we go. Woo! Yeah. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to write the load expenses method, yeah? And it's a global variable because I'm going to probably want to reuse that in a few places. All right, and let's write load expenses. So, first thing we're going to do is load everything into a string array. Why? Because that's what the load strings method does. And then we pass in the file name. Is it called expense.txt? Okay, so now I have each row from the file in a separate string. So now I can go through each element in this string array, and I can make a record out of it, okay? Or I can make a class, an instance of a class. Several ways to write it. Let's write it this way first of all. For string lines, line, colon, lines. And that's going to go through every element in the lines array, and for each element in the lines array, the string line will have each element in it, right? One after another. So, okay, now what we want to do is create a new expense instance. And we're going to encapsulate the data from each row into an instance of a class. So expense slightly long-winded way first of all, and then afterwards we'll refactor this and I'll do it slightly nicer way, right? So there's expense equals new expense. Is that the way you spell expense? Yeah, cool, okay. So, yeah. Expense dot name is going to be equals to the 0th element in that string array. So let's take that string and split it now on the tab character. What should we call this? Elements. So we're going to split it on the tab character. Do you guys know how to make the tab character? When you press the tab key on a keyboard, it actually puts a tab character into your document. How do you make the tab character?
/T.
Yeah, very good. You might have remembered this from last year. You've done these kind of, \n and \r and things like that. Okay, so the tab character is \t. Like that.
You don't have that hash key there.
There we go. Yeah, it's just you have to switch the keyboard and then you get the hash key. Okay, so it's going to be equals to elements at position 0. So it's the 0th, the 0th part of that, right? The first bit of that, or the 0th bit of that, of every line, you can see is the person's name. All right, and we've split it on the tab key. So then let's get the next bit. And let's just double check what the format of the file looks like. Yeah, so next of all is the party. At position 1. Next bit is the constituency. Y. At position 2. Now the next bit are going to be the string bits, the float bits. Expense.returned is going to be equals, now we need to convert a string to a float here. So float.parseFloat. That's the Java way to do it. So I mean there's a slight shorthand you can do in processing, but this is the way, this is actually part of the Java language. So it's better to get used to, if you need to do it, to use this way rather than the processing way. But it will have no effect really. It's just, like I say, this is using the Java language rather than anything that's added to the Java language by processing. So that's expense, that's my expense data. And then claimed. And then finally we have the total amount. Is going to be equals to so it'll be expense.claimed minus expense.returned. Okay, so let me save my sketch and just run the sketch to make sure that everything compiles. C-L-A-I-M-E-D, C-L-A-I-M-E-D. I'm going to save everything, run it again, just to make sure that everything works. Okay, so everything has worked and compiled there. Now, let me leave that code up for a second, right? Just if people are taking the code down, I'll leave the code up there for a minute and maybe just give people a minute to take a look at that code and make sure that they understand what's happening. And ask any questions if you want. This is a really, really useful technique, and I'd be very, I'd say no matter what job you're in, you're going to be making classes to encapsulate, data, and you're going to be making array lists out of instances of those classes. Oh, sorry, there's one thing, of course, we haven't quite done yet. There's my new expense object, and at some stage I need to go expenses.add the new object that I created. Okay, so that's just going to add that new object that I've created to the array list. Is that okay with everybody? I'll leave it just there for a couple of minutes, let people take the code down, right? Yeah, in second semester. They don't really, they're not used so much in processing. Everything is public in processing, but yeah, you'll find them in a lot of Java code. Yeah, definitely. They're you know,
Yeah, because you
there's a lot of schools that follow getters and setters. I no longer use them in any code that I write. I think they're a waste of time.
pick a name for your array and say equals those strings. You're saying nothing is equal to those strings.
Okay.
Put your name in there. Say Shane equals main string. And then what? So you declared
Is that okay with everybody? Does anyone ask any questions about the code that we've written so far before I move on to the next bit?
Where do you save the class?
The class file gets saved into the same folder with a PDE extension.
And then it creates its own folder when you save it in there. Is that...
No, it's in the same folder. If you jump over to here now, there's OOP tutorial. Now there's two PDE files. There's expense.pde.
Well, I saved my expenses into that folder and I created a folder in there called expenses that now has the new
Did you just create the new tab, did you?
Oh yeah, it was supposed to create a class or something.
Yeah, so the best way to do it is just to create your sketch like this and then go create a new tab for every class that you want to make. Like that. So you choose a new tab and make the tab name the same name as the class.
I did all that.
Did you?
Yeah.
And what's happened?
It's just... Oh wait, no, it didn't. It's actually a new window.
What's that? Oh, you did new window. Oh, yeah, it's because it's a new window. I think a new window typically makes it like a new sketch, yeah? Yeah.
Switch to the expense.
Sure did, yeah. So that's a you know, pretty basic example of a class. In that I have fields here, I have a constructor, but I haven't put any methods on it. So, is that okay with everybody? Now, one of the things that the sketch asks people to do, or the lab test asks people to do, is make a parameterized constructor. So this is what we call a default constructor. You can also make a constructor, and it's very typical that you make a constructor that takes stuff like the name, the party, and the constituency, that pass these in, and then it assigns them to be the field. So you can construct the object from a load of parameters. Yes?
Can you have more than one constructor?
Yeah, definitely. It's very common that you'd have lots of constructors, in fact. So let's make a second constructor. In fact, let's make 3 constructors, because there's one nice type of constructor, which I want to show you how to make. And this is sort of new, so I wasn't going to bother doing it in the tutorial. I was going to go through it in the class next week, but I'll show you now. It's fairly standard that you would do something like this. I'll just do a couple of them, right? String, party. Okay, I'm just going to do 3 of the fields, but it's pretty standard that you make a constructor that takes all of the fields required to create one of those objects, right? And then what you do is you do something like, you want to say that the parameter name gets assigned to the field name inside the class, the instance of the class. So if you look at this method, expense now, right? What I want to do is take the name that gets passed in as a parameter, and I want to assign it to the name field. Alright, so that I can construct the object from a load of parameters. You know, how I would construct the object then is over here I would go, instead of going new expense, you could do something like E equals new. And then you can pass in stuff like Brian, and my party would be independent. And like 90, like that, okay? So that's how you call a parameterized constructor, and you pass in parameters. So you construct the object from the fields that you want it to hold, or from the values that you want it to hold. Now there's a slight bit of weirdness here, because now I have 2 fields called name, and you need to use a special new keyword in the Java language in order to disambiguate between the parameter name and the name that's fielded the class. And you use this keyword here called this. Okay, so that's what's called a parameterized constructor. That new keyword this, that refers to the instance of the current instance of the class. So, you know, what it's typically used for is to do this sort of thing here, where I'm passing in a parameter which has the same name as the field which is part of the class. So when you go this.name, it's referring to the name part of the class as opposed to the name parameter. Because otherwise, what would you write? You write name equals name, meaning name up there means equals name here. And of course, that won't work because name equals name. You know, this is what's called variable hiding. So this variable name is hiding the field name. And so to get around that problem, you use this.name to refer to the field rather than the parameter.
So you still use this if the name will be different, like, or the name has to be
No, you don't have to, but actually it will work kind of fine. A lot of people do something like that, underscore name. Yeah, definitely. And then you can go something like this.name equals underscore name. So that's another thing. And people sometimes maybe call it something, you know, a different parameter name. But the OO way of doing it, and if you look at Java code from the JDK and stuff, this is the way to do it.
But once you do it that way, you don't need this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need this dot. Unless you want to, but of course it will still compile, you know, with or without it. So that's my parameterized constructor. Another type of parameterized constructor I like to write is this type of parameterized constructor. I like this because it takes the code out of this here. And I like to take all of this code here and just pass the entire row like this, and take all of this code out. I like to take all of this code out. See that? It's much neater. And just put this code into the constructor. I think it's a nice way of doing things. So then you just go elements equals the, sorry, that should be called line, let's say, or row. So then I call line.split, and then you just assign the fields like this. Yeah, I like it. That's the type of parameterized constructor I like. So what am I doing now? I'm constructing the object directly from a row of information from the file, or from a line of data from the file, and I just pass the line in. And this, I think, makes your code a little bit cleaner, because you're relying on the constructor to construct the object from a string, and then over here you are just going add expense, and then you just pass the line in. So it makes your code here much cleaner, because I've taken some of that code and I've put it over here into the constructor. Does everybody see that? Do you understand? No problems. Okay, I'll explain it again, right? So, these parameterized constructors allow you to pass in fields when the object is being created. So, what I'm doing over here is I'm going to pass in a line from the file. I'm going to say construct an expense object from a line from the file, right? So the line is going to have the whole tab separated values. So over here in expense then, all I do is I parse the line from, split it on the tab, and then I assign the fields based on the elements of the line. I've just taken the code from the main sketch and put it into a constructor, and that's a nice way to separate your code and to make your code a little bit cleaner. Does that make sense now? Does that make sense? Alright. Is that alright with you, Ben? Get it? Does everybody understand what I've done? Yeah, so I'm just constructing it. I've just taken this code and put it into the constructor instead. It's just makes it a little bit cleaner. Okay, so let's try and do the next part. Let's just make sure that works first of all. And compiles. Yeah, so everything works and compiles. The next part that we had to do, well, I think we'll leave this sort of more complicated bit till Monday, because what I've got to do is create another array list and search that array list, because I want to group everything by party now, you know. So I have to take all the Fine Gael expenses and I have to group them into one other object called party expenses, right? But let's just draw the graph. Drawing the graph is pretty straightforward. Oh yeah, another good thing I should probably do in my constructor is I should probably put in the color thing. So I call it C equals color. Okay, so let's give this expense object a random color, so that when I come to draw it, I'll know what color it needs to be. Okay, so there's my expense object created with a random color. And you guys remember, that's how you create a random color. Just equals color, and you pass in the random method, and 0 from 255 gives you the actual expense object, right? Or gives you the color. So, let's write a method called draw expenses. And this is about the simplest kind of bar chart that we can draw of the expenses. Not putting any text or anything in here, so let's just write the method draw. So there's the draw expenses method. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to take that array list that I've created, and I want to draw one bar in a bar chart out of every element from that array. You remember that? So first of all, I need to decide how wide each bar is going to be. How do I calculate the width of each bar? Yeah. Amount of elements. And what's the other thing? I take the amount of elements and I divide it into the width of the screen. Excellent, right. Is it dot length? Can you guys remember? Is it dot size or dot length? Yeah, I think it's dot size. Okay. And then we can go for, let's use it a for loop just in case. For int I equals 0, semicolon I is less than. Okay, and then I want to draw a bar, so I'll use rect. Oh yeah, let's do stroke. It's going to be equal to EXPENSES. How do I get the array element? How do I get the an element out of an array list? Dot get, yeah. At position I. So then let's go stroke expense dot color. Did I call it dot color like that? Oh, dot C. You're right. I called it dot C. Good man. Thank you. And then fill expense dot C. And then rect. Give me some feedback. Give me some guidance here. How do I calculate the x's and the y's for this?
No bracket 0, the y would be the height.
The y will be the height. How do I calculate the x for one side of the bar?
It's the width multiplied by I.
Bar width.
Yeah, it'll be bar width multiplied by I. Cool. So don't forget, this is I is going to start at 0. So this is going to start me at the extreme left of the screen. So if bar width doesn't really matter what it is. And then the y coordinate.
Whatever the height is.
Sure. But let's say we're going to draw from the bottom up. So what's the first y coordinate?
Height minus the
Height.
expenses don't get up.
Yeah, there's several ways you can do it. You can just do height, you know, because I want it to be right at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, there's several ways you can do this, right? What I'm drawing is from the bottom of the screen upwards, you know, so I can just pick the bottom of the screen as being my y coordinate. My second x coordinate.
Bar width.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Rect actually takes bar width. Yeah, it's not the second x coordinate at all. Okay, so bar width is going to give me the width of the rectangle. The height of the rectangle will be? Could map it. Yeah, let's just do the really simple case, because that's all we'll do first of all. Just pick.
Height minus expenses.
You don't really need height minus expenses, because it's actually slightly confusing. The second parameter for rect is the height of the rectangle. So it's not the y coordinate of the rectangle, it's the height of the rectangle.
Just minus.
Yeah, it's my total.
So minus expenses dot get.
Yeah.
Position I.
Sure, so I already have this thing called expense, I'll just reuse it. Expense dot total. Minus expense dot total. Minus expense dot total will make my rectangles draw upwards instead of drawing downwards. And if my y coordinate is the bottom of the screen, then expense dot total will draw from the bottom up rather than from the top. So let's click the play button. Hopefully I should have. Okay. Divide by 0. Ah, yeah. Why am I getting divide by 0? What have I not called?
Load data.
Yeah, I haven't loaded the data, right? So I actually haven't called load expenses. So that's interesting. So that means I haven't actually tested that code. So that code might have a bug in it. In fact, if it works straight away, I'd be very surprised. I'd say we'll have a bug. So now, file expense.txt is missing or inaccessible, so let's make sure I named my file correctly. I call it expenses, E-X-P-E-N-S-E-S, right? Zoom out, click the play button. Okay, something weird going on there. Wow, loads of weird stuff. I'm a terrible
Why
programmer.
is it minus expense not total right?
Because for boxes starting at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, because rectangles by default draw downwards, right? And what I want to do is start at the bottom of the screen and draw upwards. So that's why you use minus expense.
Where you're drawing the variable total, right?
Total is
Oh yeah, it's a field in the
Yeah,
expense.
no, that's
Yeah.
what I mean, that's what you're drawing as that particular field.
Have I even calculated? I've calculated total as claimed minus returned. Okay, so give me some feedback here. You guys have been following along. Why is it not working? So there's loads of things. The bar width thing is wrong. And also the height is totally wrong. Oh, maybe it's because these expenses values are really big, is it? Okay, so they're all huge numbers. Yeah, so that's why the bars are really big. It's because those numbers are huge. I would certainly need to map that onto a range. So let's do the map range. Definitely need to map range. Why are they not filling the width of the screen though, huh? What's that?
Like, you need to order the flow.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That seems like a good possibility. Okay, let's fix it really quickly. Instead of dividing by expenses.size then, should I divide by that? Okay, let's try that. Yay, excellent. Okay, there's bug number 1 fixed. Bug number 2 is to do this mapping thing. Let's do the map thing then, right? Let's take a quick look at the data. And just see what we map onto what. These are like 5,000. What's the biggest value here? What I should have probably done is write some code to get the maximum, and then I can map onto the maximum, you know? So,
53 didn't work too.
alright, let's try 50,000, right?
It's not going to be them values because you're doing
Subtracting the return, but I think the returns are quite small amounts, so maybe if I use 50,000. What's the right way to do this? The right way to do this is to figure out which one is the max, and then I can map the range, you know? But let's just do a quick, just to make something come up on the screen, because we're almost out of time. So let's take map.total, we'll map that from the range 0 to 50,000, and we'll map that on the range 0 to minus the height of the screen. Okay, so that means if the value is 50,000, it will use minus the height, and if the value is 0, it will map it to 0, and all values in between. So hopefully now we should have something come up on the screen. That looks kind of like a decent graph. Alright, that's a bit better, okay? So maybe if I was to do this properly, I would actually write a method to calculate what's the maximum value, and then I know what to put in here instead of 50,000. So, but just we don't have time, so I think just to get something on the screen, you know, I'll put 50,000 in there, and we should probably calculate the max to do that properly. Okay, does everybody understand the map bit? Let me put the map bit up onto the screen, and just so you can see, remember, I'll just make one little comment on the map thing. What map does is it takes a value and says that this value can go between the range of 0 to 50,000, and it's going to map it onto the range 0 to minus height. So that means if it's 0, it will use the value 0. If it's 50,000, it will use the value minus height. And if it's half of, if it's 25,000, it will be half the height. So it maps some value from some range of numbers onto another range of numbers. Yeah?
Why do you need minus height for a map?
Yeah, good question. Because I want my rectangles to draw upwards, right? By default, if you use a positive value in the rect function, the rectangle will draw from the top left-hand corner and draw downwards. So if I specify a negative value, it makes the rectangles draw upwards instead of downwards. Okay with everybody? Okay, we'll leave it at that for today, and I'll do this complete example on Monday, okay? And maybe a few other things as well. Okay. Yep.